And I think we need we're live again.
We're live. So we were just trying to decide, and we had decided that we wouldn't proceed if there were technological problems. I think that was the decision of the Senate or the caucus or whatever. And so we were waiting, but now it's a moot point. So Tara, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to frame this a little bit, as Tara's going to get to, her company has a contract with the state for the lottery machines and revenues and et cetera. There is, as you've heard from Tucker, there's a lot of different ways, if we go forward this, how it could be promoted on a mobile site, on a physical site, on both. I think I'm framing this as correctly, that Tara's client or Tara's employer represents the physical site methodology. So with that, let's welcome Tara, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have a written testimony. I'm just going to read it, but I'm kind of getting the hang of, if you guys have questions or want to talk about something, please feel free to just jump in. All right.
Okay.
So Mr. Chairman Sarakin and members of the Senate Committee on Economic Development, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to testify today. I'm here in support of your S-77. As you have seen, my name is Tara Jones, and I am the Director of Government Relations for Intralot. Intralot is the current technology partner of the Vermont Lottery. We are also a contractor for 12 other lotteries in North America, including providing a sports betting platform to 3 other U.S. lotteries. We are in conversations with policymakers in 7 other states contemplating sports wagering legislation. As recently, Louisiana has dropped legislation last week in reference to including lottery retail base as a part of their platform. So y'all are not alone in having this conversation. While our U.S. headquarters is in Duluth, Georgia, Intralot employs over 25 Vermont residents. We have field service retail support and call center retail support, and our office is in East Montpelier. So that's a little background there, but 70% of the world's sports betting operations, so worldwide, are overseen by lotteries. Intralot is the world's #1 sports betting operator in government regulated markets. So meaning that the sports book is under the control of the state and or lottery. So it is not, it's very common, and we're gaining ground in the US as far as lotteries being that regulatory manner. We manage 29 sports betting operations worldwide, and we are on 5 continents. So that's just kind of a broad view of what we do worldwide. Right now in the United States, there are 19 states that offer sports betting. 8 of them wholly or partially use the lottery for agency oversight. So what this means for Vermont is that we now have factual data to show which models work in the best interest of the state and which do not. So no 2 states do this the same. Tucker had pointed that out, that there really isn't just one model that states are leaning towards. The majority of them are all doing something different. States such as New Jersey and West Virginia, they've got out-of-state operators, and those operators are collecting up to 5 to 8 times the amount of revenue than what the state is collecting. And honestly, the state receives little, if any, additional economic benefit. This is due in part to a low state tax rate and an unmandated handle that have, in most cases, been legislatively set. An 8 to 10% tax rate in these instances is far too low for the state. Keep in mind, the pandemic has changed the way legislators need to be looking at sports betting. Previous models used early on to establish these state sports betting programs, they now need to be re-examined so as to understand what states may have gotten wrong, what weren't included, and what we, as a state need to include. Notably, in the month of January, Tennessee, we're going to look at Tennessee real quick, just a little figure. Tennessee had 1/4 of the handle, so 1/4 of the dollars wagered. than were wagered in New Jersey. The state of Tennessee returned twice the amount of revenue with 30% less population. This is 100% in part to their 20% tax rate. They are a mobile-only platform, but they have a tax rate of 20%. So they did 1/4 the handle, but returned twice the money to the state. Tennessee, they're mobile only, so they should have included retailers, which is part of the discussion here, so that's great. We expect Tennessee and other states to kind of cure these oversights at some point in the future. Let's talk specifically about Vermont, though, and your stakeholders. Stakeholders being the state of Vermont and the citizens, the retailers of the state, as they are one of the largest employers in the state of Vermont. The third is the Vermont Lottery, and finally, sportsbook providers. For all stakeholders to benefit from sports wagering in Vermont, there should be options available to best serve all parties, with the central theme to maximize revenue to the state and its people. So there's a way for everyone to be at play here, and that's what we're going to address. Intralot is proposing a model that benefits each of these stakeholders through an omni-channel approach, with the main theme of being, what is best for Vermont. In this model, in order to maximize revenue generated, we propose to offer players the ability to participate at lottery retailers as well online through mobile. We suggest the Vermont Lottery Commission would provide for retail and mobile under the lottery brand, but with a separate operator or operators providing the sportsbook platform and the operators assuming all risk. No risk to the state of Vermont. Let's talk about the benefits and solution of the lottery portion of the model. As you all may know, currently now when the lottery adds games and product to their portfolio, one benefit is that all profits generated from the sale of those games are transferred to the Vermont Educational Fund. So since its inception in 1979, lottery has contributed over $725 million to that fund. That's a significant fund for the state, and sports betting is just going to grow that. Another benefit is to lottery retailers who earn additional commissions generated from offering sports betting as a part of their gaming portfolio. But really what this means is increased foot traffic into their stores. Let's get people comfortable visiting these convenience stores, retailers, and placing that bet. There are nearly 600 lottery retailers currently that earn commission in Vermont. Now, lottery commissions have been down due to COVID and closures, but offering sports betting gives them an opportunity to add jobs back, potentially upgrade their establishments, and more importantly, just help them get back on their feet and in the game. The lottery was licensed in the state of Vermont in 1977 to conduct in a retail environment. So Vermont Lottery has operated in a highly self-regulated environment for the last 20 years, involving over nearly $10 billion worth of player transactions that are constantly audited by the state and accounted for. Players are ensured that their wagers are processed with the highest amount of integrity and transparency. Today, lottery conducts business in retail locations across Vermont using a wagering platform provided by a third party, which is Intralot, that transacts and validates each wager in just under 3 seconds and contractually provides the lottery and state a near risk-free platform. So again, this sports betting going to the lottery is a risk-free program for the state. The lottery, through its existing network, offers a built-in wide area network and existing infrastructure. So that is going to save the state on cost and speed to market because it already exists. Your 600 lottery retail base is already there. And the sports wagering platform can be ran on their existing terminals that they have, the clerk-based terminal. The lottery can determine the payout percentage of the sports book while being directed by legislation. So again, that's, making sure that the state is maximizing revenue. If the operator of a sports book does not maintain those payout levels that the state determines, then the operator is obligated to make up that shortage to the state. So if the state wants to make sure that, we're paying out at a 90% rate, we pay out more, the operator has to make up with that difference. So again, no risk to the state there. The Vermont Lottery follows both state mandates and industry best practices that contribute to the protection of players with social problems. So the Vermont Lottery is great at problem gambling and advertising issues. And so, they really promote that and support that at a state level to protect the Vermont players. There's also great education pieces and certain tickets, they won't pay back to a winner if they owe back taxes or child support. So there is a great social aspect to doing best practices here at the lottery. And then also, the lottery is mandated to return all profits to the state. All profits generated from the sports book are either going to be distributed to small business in the form of a retail commission or transferred to the state, minus overhead and contractor fees. So you're really looking at putting money back into that educational fund or also into your small businesses as part of a commission. So just to wrap this up, and y'all might have questions, for the state of Vermont, we are humbly making the following recommendations and considerations. That one, the state uses an all-inclusive approach that by providing sports betting licenses that allow the Vermont Lottery Commission to operate as well as mobile providers. And that two, legislators use their capacity to mandate, hold, and a tax as a means for maximizing the revenue for the state of Vermont. That's it for the written testimony. So I would be happy to answer any questions or have a conversation about whatever y'all would like.
Thank you. Have you submitted that testimony, or can you, to Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Tara? So you're not suggesting that this be done exclusively physically at lottery stations. You're suggesting a combination of that and mobile devices.
Absolutely. I mean, it may not be feasible for someone to always make it into a retail establishment, but we need to be able to offer that to folks that want that avenue to place their bet.
Right. Okay.
And may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Tara, what percent, we have a sort of set lottery participation now. What are you projecting as the lottery participation increase by moving to mobile devices as well? Your all-inclusive approach.
Let me just make sure, Senator, that I understand your question. So are you asking if we're going to increase lottery player usage or if they're going to kind of cannibalize and move to mobile? I just want to make sure.
No, just what the increase of participation do you guesstimate by expanding this opportunity for people to bet?
To answer your question, Senator, we really see that statewide, in the nation, states are really averaging about what they do in lottery sales. They are seeing that in a sports betting format, but we do recognize that about 80% of players are going to gravitate towards mobile. So about 20% of your play. So if we're looking at the state of Vermont doing $300 million annually, about 20% of that is going to come from a retail player, someone coming into retail.
So, and 80% will still be mobile. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So do you concur with what FanDuel put up on their slides as projected number of players out there presently? I can't remember whether they were that 140,000, whether that's, I think that's the projection they say as to how they calculated the revenue. I don't know whether they said those same numbers were people who are playing presently on offshore gaming sites. Do you have any projections on that from studies or literature?
Senator Strachan, I think that number is probably fair. I mean, we read the same studies that they do from the American Gaming Association. That number, it seems a little high as far as offshore bettors, but that is what the studies show, that 140,000 are betting offshore currently in Vermont.
Okay. And that could be a daily bettor to a once a year bettor, right?
Absolutely. That could include someone that just wanted to place a bet on the Super Bowl, but they're registered in that, they did one bet. I don't think that there are specifics nailing that down as to, those aren't daily users.
Okay. Thank you very much. Unless there are other questions, I'm just going to give Gary a few minutes to add anything he might before we move on to alcohol.
Thank you. I don't have a lot to add. I certainly appreciate the idea, and as I mentioned earlier about the multi-channel approach, I think that certainly makes the most sense. Again, as I've said to the committee previously, it's important for us to meet our players where they want to play, and if that happens to be at lottery retailers, we should have that channel. If it's mobile, we should have that channel. I do appreciate the comment about having some guaranteed revenue for the state. And as I've said in a prior year, and I know not all the committee members are the same, but there's two ways to look at this. As the proposal that had been discussed both today and in the past, we really are in business with the mobile providers. And as I have mentioned in the past, they want to recruit players. Totally reasonable that they want to do that. But they will spend the money, a part of which is the state's money, to do that. So I've thought about some other alternative methods we might use to make our share of the money on this. And one way to do that would be taxing off the handle, off what is bet in total. Again, it doesn't need to be a ridiculously high number. It just would guarantee that regardless of how much the providers want to spend to generate additional business, that it won't come out of the state share. And if they make poor choices in the bets and the odds, that doesn't come out of the state share either. So it really puts us more in a regulatory position. We're regulating the industry, and we're collecting a percentage of the revenue that's bet. So what the industry uses is the term gross gaming revenue, for those that aren't familiar with it. And that really isn't really how most people think of gross. That's what's left after they've paid all the bills. And that's where our share would come from. And that is how it is in a number of other states. I'm talking about, a tax off how much is bet. And that would generate the state a known amount, and it wouldn't be impacted by any marketing costs, any losses, anything else that the companies, are willing to do to generate business, get people to sign up on their platform, because that's really what it comes down to. As Mr. Winchell mentioned, they do have marketing expenses. They do want to get their players on their platform. And if we have multiple vendors, they're going to fight to do that. That's reasonable. But it's a question is, should the state be paying for that? And, they again, I think they could tell you that they could put limits on that. How much of our money would go into that? Again, those are all possibilities going forward. And I think the bill as drafted does allow the state to enter into those contracts. It's just, deciding what makes the most sense, whether it's a tax off the top or it's something other than that. And as I mentioned in the past, but not this session, New Hampshire has just one mobile vendor. They also happen to be the company that is running the brick and mortar sports books, and Interlot is running the lottery side, and they get a very significant portion of the gross gaming revenue. It's 51% is my recollection. So and they got there by not having competitors. And I know the industry feels strongly that's not where they think that it should be, that we should have options for players. And I don't disagree with that. I just want to make sure that the state gets the revenue that we're anticipating getting. So there are my comments.
Just one last question, Gary. I think last time you were in, we asked you if you could come up with some projections on the numbers of, you have come up with a projection on revenue, but the number of people based on the literature or other states' experience that you feel are presently doing offshore gambling, Vermont residents.
Yeah, so I appreciate that reminder. So I did do some research. I found some, more scholarly articles that are out there. There's one from the Journal of Gambling Issues from December 2019. I'm happy to share that with the committee. I'm not sure if it's pretty dry reading, but I think we're probably in the right range as far as for adults go, being about a fifth of the state of adults will bet perhaps once a year or more frequently. I mean, that are engaged with offshore sports betting. So I think it's hard to pin down an exact number. We're not regulating it, obviously, so we don't know. We're not conducting survey of random Vermonters,
So if we have 500,000 adults in Vermont, you're saying roughly it's a guesstimate of 100,000.
Exactly that. And I'm extrapolating that based on surveying that was done in other parts of the United States to try to get to that number. But there's a lot of information that show that Americans love to gamble in different areas. I mean, gambling can be a wide range of activities. It isn't just betting on sports, whether it's playing the lottery or having a bet on your cornhole game out in the backyard, whatever it happens to be. Americans do like to participate in gambling activities, and certainly so many people are interested in sports and find it fun to participate in sports betting. So that's why I think so many people are participating.
And we might point out it's not just Americans.
It isn't, but I do, yes, but we do like it here. So
okay. Thank you all. Gary, you might want to stick around for the next session. I think I'm hearing a bounce back. Are other people hearing that on my voice? Okay.
What, Michael?
Yes.
There's an echo somewhere.
No, that's what I just said. I don't know why. But we'll persevere. On the witness list, I guess.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Andrew, I have a separate question for you, which I'll email you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Not
Andrew.
related.
Okay, I think my recollection is that Secretary or Commissioner Sherling, I forget your title at this point.
Commissioner.
Welcome back to Economic Development. Is it
It's a
Secretary?
pleasure to be back, Senator.
Okay,
I miss you.
we miss you too. So
He gets to see some of us in the afternoon now in GovOps.
Right. So we had some questions that came up in our review of H313, especially on the takeout carry out of alcoholic drinks, single serve or bottles or whatever. Whether anything has surfaced in your neck of the woods in terms of concern that I know there's supposed to be tamper seals on the stuff that goes out, date stamped or whatever. But I mean, have these state troopers, I guess, just to get to the heart of it, they seen any indication of people taking that stuff out and drinking it on the way home?
We have not, Senator. And for the record, Mike Sherling, Commissioner of Public Safety. VSP has not seen that. However, there's a sort of a large asterisk next to that response because the point of this period of time where this has been an option, there have been substantially altered response methodologies in place by law enforcement statewide to try to mitigate the spread of COVID. So car stops generally are down quite substantially in 2020 and into the early part of 2021. So anecdotally, there's nothing to report. Statistically, 2020 and the first quarter of 2021 bear no resemblance to any prior year in terms of enforcement, car stops, restaurant operations in general. So there's no real way to speak to the statistics. We asked the VSP traffic safety team to put together some thoughts for me on this, and I concur with what they've delivered, which is, is it conceivable that you could see an increase in DUI incidents? It's conceivable. It's conceivable that we could decrease the number of DUI incidents from another section of this particular bill around festivals. It's also conceivable that there could be a positive impact that will be almost impossible to measure because it's difficult to measure the absence of something, but that positive impact could come from people who would otherwise choose to have a drink or two at an establishment and then drive home versus choosing to take it out, leave it sealed, consume it when they get home. But again, that will be difficult to measure because you won't be able to measure that it didn't happen.
Right.
So, in a nutshell, nothing negative to report. We're not against the bill. I think if it passes, what the team's going to do is work with liquor control. DLC has a really solid data analysis program in play, and they are our measuring point of last sale in DUIs to the extent we can collect that information from people who choose to share it if they're arrested for that. So that will leverage that effort to measure what happens going forward. And if there do appear to be adverse effects, we'll certainly report them back. But at this stage, other than a potential hypothesis, there's nothing substantive to report in that area.
Thank you very much for that. So you did mention festival permits. Could you elaborate a little bit about that section of the bill?
The analysis there was that the wording that is in the version of the bill that was reviewed this week, unless it's changed in the last day or so, potentially has a positive impact on DUIs by limiting the number of alcohol servings allowed during a festival attendance. So again, hypothetical, it will be difficult to measure because, again, you can't measure the absence of something, but we can certainly look at the trend line of reports of point of last sale at a festival going forward. But the baseline, I think, is pretty stable there to begin with, so we wouldn't expect to see much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good to see you again. Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, thank you. That is an interesting, so anecdotally, Commissioner, I've heard different information that there has been an increase in DUI, may not be huge, but there has been an increase in DUI during the pandemic, just as we've seen an increase in opioid use and several other things that have been tracked. And so that's why we've invited Brad Vail today of the Hartford, who's our acting chief of police in Hartford. It might be interesting to have a local response testimony following a statewide testimony.
I'm eager to hear that. Again, we're just reporting for the VSP cross section of things. So relatively small towns and highways. So certainly areas on the highways, in particular, areas that have had decreased traffic over the last 13 or 14 months for obvious reasons. But
Right.
Municipalities and our more, I'll use air quotes, urban areas do have have some experience there, and they do have a different sight picture.
Right. And so, Mr. Chair, would it be okay for our acting police chief in Hartford to go next?
I was going to invite our former pro tem to go next. He's on the list, and then we can go to Brad. I do want to say to the committee, and I hope I'm not out of school here, Deputy Commissioner Kessler, but I asked, there was some talk in our last meeting that the governor might extend the carryout provision in his executive order for another year. And I think the thinking is that there probably, if the state of emergency is lifted, there's no authority for the governor to do that. So it's up to us to do that in this bill. If we want to extend that for another year, we can't rely upon the governor doing that. So let me move to John Campbell. John, welcome. Good to see you. I hope I can see you.
Let's
Yeah.
see if I can see you here. I'm more than happy, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me, but I'm more than happy to have Brad go first. In fact, I'd be interested to see what he had to say as well. So if it's not,
Okay.
if you have time,
Okay.
I'm more than happy because my testimony is going to be very, very similar to
Okay.
the commissioner. So.
Okay, I think we have consensus. Brad, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Along the lines of the height of the pandemic, the DUIs did not increase when the bars and other establishments were closed. That said, since they've been opening up, as people got more and more restless, we have seen a slight uptick in DUIs. However, we can't make the correlation that any of that was related to the to-go drinks. With that said, because the majority of the information that we glean from where the individuals have been drinking is based on their interviews, sometimes they don't always agree to answer the questions. We haven't seen specific evidence that there were to-go cups in the car that were opened. But relative to the uptick in DUIs, it has been on an increase down here anyway in our municipality since things have been starting to open up.
So you can't correlate it to the to-go. It could be people are drinking more in the bars and restaurants and getting in their cars.
Correct. I don't have the data to specifically correlate that to the to-go provisions that have been provided.
Does, okay, I guess I'll ask this of you, but also Commissioner Sherling and John Campbell, and maybe Gary Kessler would be best. Do other states have provisions like this, or is this sort of a unique one-off thing that happened with the pandemic? I mean, I had never heard of the concepts of taking a gin and tonic in your car from a bar before.
No.
Anybody know?
There are others. It's Mike Sherling. There are other states. The couple that we're aware of are unfortunately poor comparisons to Vermont for a host of reasons. So difficult to translate their experience to something that we might see.
Okay. Does anybody have any further questions for Brad or Senator Rahm?
But so Chief Vale, you haven't pulled someone over and seen them drinking out of a to-go cocktail cup?
Specifically, no, we do not have those occurrences down here. We do have a slight increase in DUI activity. As a matter of fact, we had a serious bodily injury crash last night. Thankfully, it was just a single car event, but they have been on the uptick, and they have been more along the lines of crash activity.
Right. But it's very noticeable to you all if there's an open container in the vehicle. And would that be sort of signified differently if they had open containers in the car?
It would be documented in the affidavit and report, but it wouldn't specifically, unless they asked on scene where that came from. Usually when they bring them back to the station and they do an interview through the process, and not everyone will engage in that interview. They'll just go through the process without answering the questions.
Okay, so would you see that you've seen an uptick in open container related DUIs or just overall DUIs?
Just overall DUIs.
Okay.
Senator, if it's helpful, I can give you some statistics on consuming alcohol while driving, possession of open container, and passengers possessing open container over several years, if that's in any way useful.
I think that's the question at hand, more so than did DUIs go up. Is there an increase in open containers and fancy cocktails being open?
I agree with that. Are your numbers current? Do they include the year of the pandemic?
They do, and I can email these to the committee. But but important to give some background that's not on here. The state police stop typically between 50 and 60,000 cars a year. It's about half of the work because highways are such a large cross section of the responsibility for the state police. The highest year of a driver in possession of an open container where tickets were issued was 2019, with 151 of those tickets across, call it 55,000 traffic stops. So it is not a frequent event.
Okay. And then you have to distinguish in terms of open container, whether under this new executive order, whether that open container came from a restaurant or from someone's home or from a convenience store. Go ahead, Senator Rom.
I have kind of a follow-up question, which is, for those of us who've been on these alcohol committees before, I seem to remember from House General that if there's to-go specialty beer or wine, because you didn't finish it in the restaurant, it's marked in a certain way. Are we requiring that these to-go cocktails simply be marked in a certain way so that it's more obvious that you can trace it back to a particular restaurant rather than just, oh, they made their own gin and tonic at home and put it in a mason jar?
I thought we heard that it has to be sealed from the
Yeah.
restaurant or bar, and it has all the information on the
Okay.
seal,
It
essentially.
it has to, because they're liable. I mean, anybody who serves alcohol is
Right.
liable for whatever happens afterwards.
Right. So if we're not seeing a big increase in signed sealed jars being opened in cars, then I just feel like we can't correlate, to-go cocktails at all to DUI.
To Senator Rom's point, it is not uncommon for people to transfer alcoholic beverages if they're going to drive with them to something like a to-go coffee cup. So whether they purchased them in this manner, or they went to a liquor store, or they were at a grocery store and bought beer, it's reasonably common for them to transfer that to something else. Could be an old McDonald's coffee cup, or a soda bottle, or a reusable coffee mug.
Okay, good. Well, get us those statistics. We understand that.
May I ask a
caveats.
follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just curious, it would be also curious to know what percent of the stops, both locally and state with the troopers, are DUIs. DUI issues in Vermont, as you know, cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in court time, in legal fees, in all sorts of ways, lost work time. And so while I'd love to have us look at this within the context of the DUI challenge we face in Vermont and what this may or may not do to exacerbate that. So while we may not have, I just want us also to keep in mind the bigger picture of the challenge we face with DUIs in this state.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move to Senator Campbell. Welcome.
Senator, how are you? Good to see all of you.
Good to see you.
I think this is the first time that I've testified in this committee.
It's great to see you and see you looking so well, given.
Yeah, I got my second shot yesterday, or a day before yesterday. I can tell you, yesterday I felt like McGilla Gorilla had taken me for 10 rounds, so I was out for the day, but popped back, so I didn't want to miss this one,
All right.
You look great. It's good to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And again, for the record, John Campbell, Executive Director for the State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. And originally, when you asked me, Mr. Chair, to testify on this, I had to check around because I had not had any personal knowledge. Generally, we'll hear some things, around the different offices, like saying, "Hey, can you believe the amount of we know in domestics, domestics have been on a rise because of the pandemic." And generally you would hear some type of chatter, and we just have not. So I checked in with my traffic resource prosecutors, who are we have two for the state. And they, I believe, checked with Commissioner Shirley's folks and also some of the other offices. And as the commissioner has stated, we really haven't seen any major uptick in DUIs as a result of what you would think would be because of open containers. And it's interesting. I think a lot of it, and maybe Chief Vail, what he said to you is, could explain this, that during the pandemic, when things were closed and people were not able to congregate for longer times at bars or restaurants, they weren't drinking that much. They were taking it out and bringing it home to do that. But as we start to open up again, people are, taking maybe a little more time to socialize. And therefore, a little more time means, maybe one more drink before I go. I know that we have some restaurants here in town that do. Bar Hill is one, and they're They offer these type of cocktails, but they're sealed in special packaging, and you take them home. And one other thing to notice is that they're a lot more expensive than they were when it was just in the restaurant. So I don't see it, and this is just a personal observation. I would be. I don't see people going and grabbing, let's say, $20 cocktails and then just sipping them down in their car on the way home. I think they probably would rather go home, be with the ones that your family members or whatever. So again, the bottom line is we haven't seen anything major uptake. I have not observed this, and in any of the licensing. I'm looking at the different licensing and different statistics, which we, unfortunately, because of our case management program, we don't have a good way to get a lot of data. But just anecdotally from the offices that I've spoken to and our prosecutors, I think this is a non-issue.
Okay. So that's a good segue into a question for you and for Commissioner Sherling. This is proposed to us as a continuation of a practice that I think was mostly designed to help the bars and restaurants weather the economic downside of the pandemic. And in the House passed version, as you know, it's suggested it continue for 1 year. If this was before us as a permanent change to Vermont laws, would you have some trepidation of changing the policies in Vermont to allow for to-go cocktails? I mean, we don't know. We heard a few states, Mike Sherling said a few states do allow for that, but they're hard to compare to Vermont. But I think people might, I mean, there may be what this committee is going to have to deal with. Is there an economic justification on coming out of the pandemic to continue this? But I want to know if law enforcement has some, underbelly kind of concerns that this may eventually contribute to an environment that could be dangerous.
I will let the commissioner and the chief speak to from a law enforcement standpoint, from on the boots on the ground. But a couple of things. It seems to me if it's definitely in the law and you clearly make it mandatory to have these sealed or having tamper-proof when you go out, I don't see that it would cause a major problem. But as the commissioner pointed out, people generally if they have a drink, they're not going to have it like you're not going to see a lot of people just all of a sudden sipping out of an open beer can. They're going to put it into another container. And the McDonald's coffee cup, I remember that from the days that I was a cop a long time ago. People would do that. You'd find all sorts of things in McDonald's cups. So I think that the people who really want to do that are going to. I think also that one of the things that Senator Clarkson brought up, and I think it's a good point, and Senator, Mr. Chair, you're aware of this, is the liability that some of these establishments will be facing. I can assure you that their insurance carriers are going to be looking at, do you do this practice and how do you do it? And how do you make sure or ensure that what your product, if you're selling it in that form, is not to be used on the open road. So that's from my perspective.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Sherling, do you want to just comment on a permanent change in the law potentially? Because I think it's very possible, as I think everybody around this table knows, that if we extend this for 1 year and it's successful and there's no harm, people are going to come back and say, potentially make it for a longer term.
Perhaps. Perhaps.
I concur with John's assessment. The reality is alcohol availability is pretty ubiquitous. So folks who are going to choose to make poor decisions are going to find different ways to do it, regardless of whether we're doing takeout service or not. So an astute observation that the price point also probably impacts positively abuse of the carryout option for folks that would otherwise use that as a mechanism to just arbitrarily increase their blood alcohol content. I think folks that are looking to to do that are going to find a less expensive means.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I said in the last hearing, I just can't imagine myself. I mean, it's a question of convenience, but if I had eaten out or took out food, I would take it home and make myself a cocktail at home for a tenth of the cost, So anyhow, thank you very much. Let's move on. We have a few other witnesses. Let's see. Amy Spear, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today. Amy Spear, for the record, I'm the Vice President of Tourism with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. I'm here on behalf of restaurants to give an idea of what informs my perspective that I'll be sharing with the committee today. The Vermont Chamber represents about 1,200 members statewide. This includes hundreds of tourism and hospitality members, and we have routine engagement with our partners at Vermont Independent Restaurants, who are advocates for, and also the National Restaurant Association. I do want to note that I shared with the committee assistant a breakdown that provides a cross-state comparison of what other states are doing with alcohol to go as we emerge from the pandemic, just to give reference of where Vermont sits in that. There's about 15 states right now that are deciding what to do with temporary measures or moving them to permanent or keeping them temporary with an extension. So, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that through the pandemic, Vermont's restaurants have been public health partners, but really due to the restrictions that they've operated under, they've operated at severely depressed business levels for over a year now. I do want to take a moment to thank the committee for all of their support in creating the Economic Recovery Grant Program. This has been a critical tool to ensure that Vermont to date has not experienced significant restaurant closures like other states. We're looking at over 100,000 restaurants that have closed due to the pandemic nationwide, and Vermont is not seeing that disruption. So just a thank you to the committee for all of your work on that. Continuing on, I do want to say that there is a lot of excitement as the path was unveiled in the Vermont Forward Plan, but restaurants are really anticipating depressed business levels into 2022. And as this committee is acutely aware, in February 2021, the employment statistics reports still show a 6,000 worker gap in food and service drinking places for employment. So not only is the restaurant industry working to increase their workforce again, get to pre-pandemic levels, but also I want to point out that as long as 6-foot distancing requirements are in place, many restaurants won't be able to operate at more than 50% capacity. And this is particularly true for small community-driven restaurants that are often located in our downtowns and on our main streets. So really, understanding the path that's ahead, the continuing of alcoholic beverage for off-premises consumption will be a helpful tool of recovery. And I do want to acknowledge that it's certainly not a cure-all, but it's a tool for the industry to help recoup some lost revenue. I also want to note that for the last year, operators have been tuning into press conferences with bated breath, waiting to see what would or would not be changed, sometimes with a 24 hours notice. And really a formal extension of the current pandemic allowed alcoholic beverages to go provisions would allow for a wind down period of the service that both licensees have provided and customers have really come to expect. Just as restaurants have been partners in the public health response to the pandemic, there are also, licensees that would be offering alcoholic beverage for off-premise consumptions are educated partners implementing and enforcing liquor laws and regulations as required. So with that in mind, restaurants are supportive of the labeling requirements that are outlined. They want to be good partners in this program. And it's been a really important line of business to create at least a little bit more of a sustainability or a path ahead. So it's a really important tool for them as they look to emerge here. And then on the consumer side, I did want to point out that looking at the trend of alcoholic beverages for consumption off-premise or with to-go orders, the consumer demand for this even prior to the pandemic, according to a National Restaurant Association survey, is 56% of all adults. So they would order to go from a restaurant if permitted. So this just goes to show that, restaurants, they go to great measures to have a craft menu. And this also really goes to their craft cocktails that complement their menu, their farm to table offerings. And this would be an important tool for them as they move forward. But with that, I'll stop there. And I want to thank you for your time today and look forward to remaining a resource for you.
Thank you. It's
Thank
very good, Amy. I did have one question. You also represent convenience stores, right?
They are a part of the Vermont Chamber membership, yes.
Have you heard anything? I mean, I sense there may be, to the extent people take to-go cocktails, stopping at the convenience store to get a 6-pack may suffer a little bit, or a bottle of wine or something like that. Have you heard any noise or anything from those members of your group that say this is added competition for us?
We haven't heard any disruption from convenience stores, or we haven't heard any negative feedback. I would say they're on two different paths. You know, often when someone gets a cocktail to go or a specialty drink to go, it's to complement their food. It's not necessarily the same as a convenience store buying behavior. So I would say they're two unique purchases.
Okay, good. Gary, just to follow up, Gary, you're still with us. Has there been any concern raised at the liquor and lottery level of some sort of impact on revenues to the state, or does the state get even more revenue in the rooms and meals tax?
So it hasn't, I appreciate the question. It hasn't been a revenue issue from our perspective. We're really looking at the public safety component to it. One of the things that we wanted to be sure got added to the bill, which was added, is the limitation on the hours. And as Commissioner Sherling mentioned, there's many places people can buy alcohol after 11 o'clock in the evening. And if somebody just wants to get drunk and drive around, they're unlikely to, be spending $20 for a to-go cocktail. It might be a cocktail for two, but we thought that the limitation on the hours, the sealing of the containers, all would help further public safety. So we don't have concerns with it as it's drafted. In fact, the department supports it. Again, there's lots of places people can go buy inexpensive alcohol if they just want to, overconsume, become impaired. They're unlikely to be going to, a bar or restaurant and purchasing it in that way at the higher prices. And again, we made sure it isn't, it doesn't go to closing time, right? It's 2 o'clock and the bar's going to close, or 1 o'clock they're closing. Oh, I'd like, 3 to-go cocktails. They can't do it because it's not allowed.
Right.
So that's how we feel about it. I just also wanted to mention, if I could, I know Senator Clarkson had some questions around this. Our department, and we have our law enforcement officers, we have implemented a place of last drink question, working with the Department of Public Safety on the data masters, which is where the breath testing is done. And this goes back to when I was a deputy state's attorney and we got those started. So one of the things that we do is we have a much more focused effort on establishments that are over-serving. So if someone's stopped for DUI and is processed now, it is a mandatory question that the law enforcement officer that's doing the processing asks where they were drinking. We then get that data, and then we have our investigators looking at the data, and we have a whole system for that, and that guides them. So instead of them just using their instinct, I think this place is over-serving, we actually are being driven by the data. So we can see where the over-serving is taking place because there were 5 DUIs in the last month processed, and they all came from the same licensed establishment. We're going to have undercover operations there. We're going to do inspections. We're going to look hard at their serving practices, make sure their staff are trained properly. So that's how we're dealing with it. And it would be the same if somebody was stopped, was intoxicated, and was driving, and they had a to-go cocktail. That'll be a place that we will go and focus on, try to make sure that they're serving appropriately.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. But Chief Vale sort of implied that not everybody responds. It's a voluntary response as to where they were last served. So how do you actually get that information if they
Right.
don't?
So of course, right. The people, they have their constitutional rights and they don't have to respond. So again, we're not getting 100% compliance with the question, but it's a huge step from where we were, where the question wasn't even asked. And if it was asked, it wasn't documented. So now the question is asked every time and it's documented, what the response is. And sure, people can lie or people can choose not to respond, but we are getting responses, and it does help us focus our efforts to get a high level of compliance.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gary.
See Senator Ram had a question.
Senator Ram.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schwenk might also be able to sort of answer this in an anecdotal sense, but I have a feeling if we, surveyed more of the general public about their purchasing patterns over the next year, there will still be a lot more people who feel safer getting a to-go cocktail, going home and seeing some of their friends in a backyard than being in a crowded place, being in a bar, being in the next few months where younger people are not vaccinated yet. So, I know, Gary, you might not be doing behavior surveying, et cetera, but I think it's also important that we pay attention to those who probably see greater public safety for themselves by getting a to-go cocktail and enjoying it at home right now than going back into a very crowded, chaotic environment too quickly in the next 6 months.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And I also think we, as a department, we want to support our licensees, make sure, as Amy Spears said, that they continue to be in business. And this is one way that the legislature can do that we think will have really a minimal impact on public safety in the end. And that is certainly, again, part of our mission to make sure that people use alcohol responsibly, that it's served responsibly. We think this can be done in an appropriate way and are happy to work with the industry to make sure that's accomplished. We'll add it to our training programs as well. All sellers and servers are trained. We get out training material and updates all the time. So we would, again, be happy to make sure that they're well trained and understand what the limitations are.
Thank you. Avery, welcome. I think you're our last witness of a long morning. Good to see you.
Back.
Tell us what you'd like us to hear.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm Avery Schwenk with the Herman Thrush Brewery in Brattleboro, Vermont, and the president of the Vermont Brewers Association board currently. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate my time I get to spend in this committee, and hello to those of you that I haven't testified before in front of here. Just a little bit of background on the Vermont Brewers Association. We're a trade association of breweries in the state of Vermont, nonprofit organization founded in 1995 to promote and strengthen the culture of craft brewing in Vermont through marketing, education, and advocacy for Vermont-made beer. Our association is comprised of nearly 70. I think we just added a new member at our last board meeting, so I think nearly 70 businesses supporting around 3,000 jobs with an economic impact of $362 million in our state per our last accounting. So we're very proud of the effect we have and our local ties to Vermont, and very proud of the beer we make here. In this bill, H313, there's kind of three sections I think that interest our association. Particularly the first one that you've been discussing is the second section, looking at to-go sales. I've heard a lot of discussion about cocktails to go, but I also want to point out another very important part of this is the sections that allow second and fourth class licenses to provide curbside sales. This is, again, extending what the governor's executive order has done. For a small business like mine in Brattleboro, where we don't do much on-site consumption and it's mostly focused on beer to go, from our tasting room, it's been wonderful to have that sense of safety and security for my staff, to know that we're limiting their contact as much as possible. Many of our staff are in the younger age brackets that are hopefully soon to be in line for getting their COVID vaccines. But I think as Senator Rum mentioned, I have a lot more peace of mind knowing we have that option to be doing curbside sales. And I feel like a lot of my cohort and many others will feel more comfortable with those limited contact transactions kind of in the near future. So having a backstop legislatively that allows us to do those curbside sales legally and really look out for the safety and I think mental well-being of my staff would be wonderful. So please don't discount the opportunity here for curbside and pickup from retails and not just cocktails to go from restaurants.
So Avery, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm envisioning a brewery with sales inside the brewery, and there's usually in that brewery, maybe I'm wrong, but isn't there usually like cans to go, like bottles of beer to go, cans to go? Is that when you talk about curbside takeout, are you talking about that, or are you talking about someone getting a growler to go?
I would say both. I think in terms of alcohol sales to go from both retail and restaurant establishments, growlers have been pretty standard practice in the beer industry. So I think looking at how this bill will be laying out similar abilities for Venice beverage and spirits-based beverages kind of makes sense to us. I think in beer we just have a head start in that we've been working with growlers, but also just the packaged beer to go.
But so that's where I'm having confusion.
Mhm.
Was it prior to the executive order, weren't you able to sell a 6-pack out of your brewery and someone walk out with it?
Yes, but what the executive order is allowing us to do is to minimize that context, so we can actually receive orders from online, verify a person can pull up, we can verify their age, who's bought it, and then put it in their car without having to make that face-to-face. Well, it's a face-to-face interaction, but without the contact aspect.
Okay.
So my understanding is that H313 allows us to continue that practice for that extension.
And that's what you're after. You're not concerned about selling a cup of beer with a lid on and a seal on it to somebody. The person can buy a 6-pack or a can of beer, right, already, or do they, or is there a business in selling draft beer? I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly.
No, I think I understand what you're asking. So I think that definitely there are some of our members that are interested, especially the brew pubs, might be interested in selling those draft beers to go. I think, again, growlers as a format for that is something that's existed for a while, so it's something that we're familiar with. I think now there's more can-focused, what are called crowlers, so kind of larger format, sealed cans. But even the ability to sell a can to go, I feel like with the labeling requirements and the sealing requirements, essentially this would allow bars to sell a can to go with a meal, or a restaurant to sell a can to go with a meal. I think that's a helpful tool for those of our members that are utilizing that. But I just want to make sure that we're also not overlooking the fact that that curbside service, so the ability to
Right.
take packaged product out to a car and
Right.
limit that interaction,
Right.
is also very helpful for a number of our members.
Okay.
Great. The second item I think that I haven't heard too much talk about is the festival permit guidance. For those of you that have been in this committee previously, I think this language looked very familiar. I think this is the third time it's been passed from the House on through your committee. I think the what we feel about this is the current language around festival permits in the law is some of the most vague that I've ever seen. There's a lot of confusion about what is a festival, what constitutes a festival, what isn't allowed. And currently, a lot of those details are done on a case-by-case basis with the with Department of Liquor and Lottery. When we first worked with them on this bill a couple of years ago, we had quite a few meetings with not just the beer industry, but also other industries, talking about how we can standardize what the format for these alcohol tasting festivals looks like, and using current practice as the guides for that. So essentially, this is what we came to based on what's currently already occurring. This would actually result in net no change to what the customer sees or what our practices are. What this does is provides more clear instructions for those that are trying to put on these festivals, and discussion with the department. So we were limiting, the back and forth on, well, what can we do, what can't we do? I think the other major thing that it allows is for mixed beverage festivals, where currently I think only wine and beer are allowed. This will allow spirits-based beverages or fortified wine beverages to be also have that opportunity to have these kind of showcase events, while still making sure that the overall event is at a level that is, we feel, fairly responsible and in line with what is currently happening in the industry.
Okay.
And then the third section of interest to us is the section 4, removing the requirement to provide notice to DLL for promotional tasting events. It's my understanding that this is something that the department is not currently interested in having, and I think that we feel likewise that we're all responsible industry members, and the majority of these are for training restaurants or showcasing new products so that the people that are actually selling them to the customers are aware and have the knowledge and vocabulary and experience to be able to effectively sell those products.
So that section is sort of a private tasting? Is that, I don't have the bill right in front of me now.
Unfortunately, I don't have it directly in front of me either.
I can address that if you like.
Go ahead,
I
Gary.
have it in front of me. Gary, what section is it?
Oh, well, I have it off to the side, actually, so now I'll have to come up with it. But I would the comment I wanted to make on it is that this came to us from the wine producers. And, Commissioner Delaney and I, in the time that I'm back to the committee and then looking at the bill. Commissioner Delaney and I, in the time that we've been there, we've sought to deregulate where deregulation makes sense. We don't want to overregulate the industry. This is designed to be a tasting that would take place at a bar or restaurant, perhaps before they're open for the day, to allow their staff to try a wine that they may be looking at purchasing to have for sale. And it's
This is
yes,
for last year.
it has been right. We did have it in last year as well. And now they have to give us notice in advance before they can do this, and it just makes it cumbersome for them. We want to. This is being done professionally. We haven't had any complaints about it. We're not sending investigators out to monitor these tastings. When they're done, they're typically done at a specific bar or restaurant with their staff, where they have the opportunity to sample. That doesn't mean drink. That means maybe you taste it and you spit it out afterward. That's typically what sampling is. And then they can, make a recommendation to their patrons when they're having dinner. We got this new wine, we have this new beer. It's, here's what it's like, and they have some experience with it. So that's really, we want to deregulate this. I think it makes sense to let the industry be professional and deal with these tastings appropriately. And if we have complaints or concerns about it, we'll certainly follow up on them. But it has not been a problem in the 5 years I've been with the department, and I've never heard from anyone that it was a problem previously either. That somehow these were drink festivals where the suppliers were providing lots of bottles of wine or beer or whatever it may be. So we just want to professionalize what I think is being done professionally, effectively.
Right. And this was an element that was in last year's bill that we just didn't have time to take up.
It was. Yes, exactly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Avery, anything more you'd like to add?
I think that about covers it. The only thing I just wanted to kind of reemphasize on the festival side of things is that the limits established there are maximum limits. They are not a license to serve that amount, and our normal service laws and training still apply. So just because we're allowed to serve up to X number of ounces, that doesn't mean that we're now allowed to overserve a patron. Everyone that's serving at these events are professionals. They've gone through the required liquor training, and we're still trained to interact with our customers that we're serving to. And, if we feel like someone's been overserved or could be overserved, to still, halt from serving them. So again, this isn't, our intention at these events is not to let people get drunk. And, for us, this is very much a showcase. This is for our association, our major fundraiser. And we like our good relationship with the Department of Liquor and Lottery, and really do have public safety, in the forefront of our minds.
So having worked on the dram shop laws 25 years ago, I assume that the dram shop laws would apply to these festivals as well if there was overserving.
Correct.
that
That's
correct,
my,
Henry?
my understanding.
Yeah, that is correct. And we also, at the larger festivals, will have our investigators help train remind the staff that are staffing the festivals from the different providers to make sure that they understand what's required. And our staff often will remain on site during the festival, just monitoring to make sure that the rules are being followed. So those, the dram shop rules apply, and we want to make sure that they're done properly. There's certainly an important part of travel and tourism in the state, in that they attract a lot of people to come try Vermont products. And so it's good for the industry. It's good for the state in general. Just would mention that wine or that tasting component is section 4 of the bill. Just wanted to make sure I didn't forget that.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Avery?
No, I just want to point out again, what a great commute this was for Avery. Instead of having to drive 4 hours to make this testimony, he's just a Zoom away, which is, I have to say, fabulous.
I do miss seeing you all in person, though, I will admit.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
I usually do Brattleboro to Montpelier in 2 hours, but that's.
That's right. 2 hours up, 2 hours down, 4 hours is what
There
I'm
you go. Here you go. Okay,
Thanks.
thank
We
you,
have a-
everybody. We're a few minutes early, so we will sign off. Time for some jumping jacks.